Another day, another set of instructions. Call of Duty time, anybody? As with last time when we did the Doom instructions, please don't take any of this personally. I realize that you didn't have a whole lot of time to do this assignment. I kind of forced it on you, and you're having to work with people who aren't in the same room and blah, 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 blah. The way I mean the commentary, I think all of you did a good job considering the time and the restraints you had on it, but the way I mean the commentary is just to point out things that you can alter, things that you can change in your own work. The instructions assignment might be submitted, but you might want to revise it, and doing some of this, in addition to being good practice, might give you a bit better insight into what to do to your work. So let's look at them. Let's start with the education groups. All the standard disclaimers about how I know you didn't have a full amount of time to work on this, blah, 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 are taking them into account. First thing I notice from my point of view is that the font use is off. Serif font for body text, sans serif font for headings. It's important because a serif font is more readable on a printed page than a sans serif font. We want to keep that up. The title of this is the same style font as the background. Having it visually distinct will make it stand out more like a title. When we get to the list of player characters, this document goes from picture, text on the right, picture on the left, text on the right, picture on the left, text on the right. And after a while, that's going to look a little bit repetitive. So feel free to shake that kind of thing up as you go through the document. The other thing I noticed that for some reason, the bullets aren't hanging indented. Normally when Word does bullets, it will put all of the text lining up under that first line. So the primary player character for the game's opening missions, PFC Allen's, well, the PFC should be lined up with the THE. Why it's not here, I don't know. And sometimes Word does weird things, but it needs to be fixed because it's going to look a whole lot cleaner if you do fix it. And by the second page of other characters, you get to see what I mean by the pictures, text lineup. There is a picture of the controller with all the buttons labeled. It might have been labeled in the original, I don't know, but it's a good thing to have. You have a breakdown of all of the buttons, but it seems to be broken out. We have directional buttons right here. If these were all indented in a little bit, it would be easier to read. You could break this long list down into a few different steps. Heads-up display has a picture of the full screen, but then it talks about the different parts of it without specifically showing me the different parts of it on the image. And that's why you want images, so you can pick out stuff. You can make this image a bit larger. You can use Word to put circles around the lower right corner of the screen, or you can find pictures that focus in just on those specific parts. It still requires a bit more work from the reader than is necessary. You could always make this more specific and clearer, and you always need to go on the basis of clarity. We're keeping up with the font thingy, and there's a few pictures put in here, but the pictures that are put in here, I'm not really sure why they're here. Pictures need to earn their weight, which means they need to be vital to understanding the document. I don't really need to see the picture on the middle page to understand any of this. Think back to when you were doing the tie your shoelace instructions bit. Pictures there would help because it would save you from doing things like put the bunny through the hole or whatever. Here, it's kind of a space filler. You also notice when we get into instructions, they're just in a straight bulleted list. These are at least indented in a hanging indent properly. That's what I meant. But if you have steps that are supposed to be performed in order, they should be numbered. The pit is broken down into the multiple waves. It'd be nice if there was a bit more space between these to help visually distinguish them. The numbered list would make finding a specific bit of information even easier, though. And that's what it's about. You want to make it easy to retrieve specific bits of information from the document. Remember the cell phone manual principle? Finally, it ends with 3 sentences on a page, and that leaves a whole bunch of blank space. It's perfectly acceptable to manipulate how the text gets laid out in the document to avoid that kind of thing. And it would be a good idea to avoid that kind of thing. It's just like it's perfectly acceptable to work with the layout so these pictures and the accompanying text right here are on the same page. And having that level of juxtaposition, having things with the things they refer to, makes it a lot easier for a reader to get understanding out of a document. Environment. We have everything in a sans serif font. This is a set of instructions, so you don't really need to put instructions as a memo. Instructions is a format. We don't have pictures, so I don't know who each of these people are. Remember, give it to your grandmother to test these things, and is she going to know the difference between Corporal Dunn and Sergeant Foley if there's not a picture of them? There is a long list of the controls, but there's no accompanying image, and it assumes that everybody is intimately familiar with the controls. I've never had a PlayStation, so I don't really know. Heads-up display, again, has the overall screen without referencing specific things. And I think they cut out that bit of the text, which is fine if you need to cut it down, but the image itself doesn't really tell us anything about the information that's being communicated by the heads-up display. We go into a bulleted list, and if you're pointing out options, this is how you do this is how you do this, it's a perfect time for a bulleted list. When you get into the step-by-step instructions, this is where it needs to go into numbered list, because there are tasks that you're supposed to do in a specific order. There's no pictures on any of these. Now, again, refer you to the whole tying the shoe thing. It would really help. And because this is all like one line and then a list, one line and then a list without any pictures or any visual distinction between them, the issue is it kind of looks like someone just threw an outline. You want, hopefully, your documents to move a little bit more swiftly, a little bit more clearly, professionally, whatever than that. Technology. I think this is the same font that the other group is using. We have paragraphs indented. You don't need to indent paragraphs. You do need to put an extra space between them, and there's not here. We don't have pictures for any of the characters, so once again, I don't really know who these people are. There's a lot of white space right here. Why is that? When we move on to the next page, they decided to put a table for the controls, and that's cool. It does make it easier to find these bits of information. However, you notice that the columns in the table don't really line up. Directional buttons, the bolded text is longer than the others, which means there's a weird indent here. I understand formatting gets to be a very persnickety kind of thing, but if you can eliminate those things, it's going to lead to a cleaner looking document. And here's a hint for other people. If you're doing a table, you can instill a table on some information to provide some structure and then get rid of the outlines. Sometimes that's a really good way to use a table. We have the heads-up display picture, and we have the different color bits on here. Now, yeah, I see that each of the boxes is coloring, but it's colored in a very thin line, and it took me a second or so to realize that the colors here were representing the colors here. And the color that they use for grenades and special grenades isn't as clear as it could be. There's not a lot of contrast between that and the background. And keeping contrast is important because as people's eyes go when they get older, it's harder and harder to see those things. No pictures throughout the rest of the text. We're not using the bullets or numbered lists, so it's going to be hard to retrieve information in the middle of a list. Don't forget the cell phone manual principle. It's very important when it comes to instructions. Transportation is using a good body font, but they're using that body font for the headings. There's no extra spaces between these paragraphs. And that would visually distinguish between them and make finding the information that much easier. Now, they've got one picture of the four guys, and they have the listing of the four guys over here, but I don't know who's who. If you're going to have an image like this, labeling each of the people would be a good way to go about using one picture for a number of list items. It would be a good way to organize information. But if you're going to have the picture, it needs to work with the text. And here, there's a little bit of a separation between them. I'm assuming that those were the main characters because when we get to other characters, there's no pictures of them at all. There's a very nice image they found to go over the parts of the controller. However, we get to this long bulleted list here where the entries aren't in a hanging indent. And I don't really know what this picture goes to because this picture is sitting here at the bottom of a list of controls. Images have to pull their weight. They have to interact with the text. They have to work as one. When we get into the tutorials, once again, we're stuck in paragraph form rather than going into the bulleted lists, or the numbered lists more accurately. And again, we have pictures. They're not directly connected to anything, so I don't know why they're here. There's lots of them, and that's cool. And I do like how in these, there is the overlays, the circles and such, but you can also number those, which would make referring to the specific annotation of the image in the text that much easier. Green circle 1, red circle 1, red circle 2, green circle 2, blah, blah, blah. A lot of the work we do in this class is going to be kind of work in progress stuff, practice stuff designed to get the standards driven right into your brain. And hopefully doing this set of instructions and going over them help just a little bit. See ya.